Hey everybody, Norm over here. We've got Michelle Steuben over here, who's a San Fernando Valley native, and she works for LA Weekly, which is a great magazine. Tells everybody who's playing where. There's a lot of articles on the arts, music, and just tells everybody where to go if you're in LA, what the current events are, all that kind of stuff. It's been a fixture for how many years?
Since 1978.
Yeah, we actually got you beat. We were open in '75.
That's right. Well, 50 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but a great magazine. So if you ever come to LA and you want to know where to go, who's playing where,
What
it's
to eat.
a big thing.
Yeah. What to eat. Yeah. What to see.
Where to
It's
eat,
true.
absolutely. All the art stuff, museum displays, anything that's current LA.
Yeah.
So we're really honored that they're doing a story on us in the documentary.
Well, you're such an important piece of LA history. 50 years. You've been
Kind of blew by.
and you've had 3 different locations only because the minute you get into one location, it mushrooms and there's no room and you had to move 3 times.
Right. Well, the very first one was a little less than 500 square feet. And, we didn't know, at the time, we were kind of breaking ground. The vintage guitar market, they weren't even called vintage guitars at the time. So we didn't know if we were going to be in business for 2 weeks or 2 years or whatever. And here 50 years have gone by, and pretty cool thing,
So, for now, you've got the showroom, you've got a special secret room,
Right.
and you've got a warehouse, right?
Right. Mhm.
Can you tell me out of all of that space, how many guitars you have?
Well, I don't even know exactly. I have less than I did because as I've gotten older, I'm thinning it out a bit. But there's a lot. I mean, really a lot. I mean, at one point I had about 800 guitars in a personal collection, and now I'm down to about 300 guitars in the personal collection. And then we have our secret stash, and then we have the showroom. And we're dealers for Gibson, Fender, Martin, LSL, which is a company in the valley here. Just
So
been
about
doing it
how
a long
many?
time.
Upwards of 20,000?
No, maybe 1,500 or something
Oh,
like
okay.
that.
All right.
Maybe a little more. I don't know. It's hard to say.
And so where, we saw in the documentary how it basically started with George Harrison, and a really funny story.
Yes.
How that happened. But since then, you've obviously, you've found other sources. What are some of your sources where you find, I look around and I think, were there ever even this many guitars made?
Yes, there were, and a lot more. And so sources to buy, you mean? So,
For you to buy, where you find them.
well, in the very beginning, we were sort of the renegades. There were the big stores, the corporate stores, and I was, out chasing guitars and trying to buy and sell guitars on the side and just kind of make a living. Eventually, I ended up accumulating so many guitars that I had to open a store. And we had a 500 square foot store, then we moved to an 1,800 square foot store on Tampa and Van Owen, and now this store is almost 6,000 square feet.
That's right. So what are some of your sources? Where do you find these
Well-
really specially vintage?
Well, in the very beginning, we had to be creative. We had to go to places like the musicians' unions. Anytime I went out of town, I used to play with a band. When I would go out of town and play, I would, check every possible, music store, pawn shop, thrift store, musicians' union, anyway, and by word of mouth. Sometimes I'd be standing someplace and somebody would say, I hear you're looking for old guitars, and I would take a lead from them. Then sometimes I would say, do you have any friends that have any old guitars? And just kind of mushroomed, little by little until eventually we had to open a store because I had so many guitars, I didn't know what to do with them. And now eventually I've become kind of almost more of the establishment where people know that we exist and they come to us. And we get stores from all over the country that call us with things they know what we're looking for. and maybe they don't specialize in what we're looking for, and they call us and we make a deal.
So yes, a memory maybe of one of the, the fondest or most significant or sentimental of any of the guitars that you've sold or bought.
Well, I mean, one thing was actually one of my very first customers who was a big star was George Harrison. So I had a friend of mine who had a music store in West LA called University Music. And George had a guitar stolen from him that was in a rehearsal studio. And it was sold in a store in Hollywood. And they tracked down the guy who actually bought it in a store. And he bought it in good faith from the store. But he ended up, they got his phone number and everything. And he said, sure, I'd be happy to give it back to George, but I would like the same type of guitar in return because I did buy it in good faith. So, and it was a very rare guitar. It was a late 50s Les Paul Standard. And it was also a guitar that Eric Clapton gave him as a gift. And so he went to my friend's music store, and my friend said, well, there's only one guy I know. He's got 3 of them, I believe. And so it's in the documentary. So he went to my friend's store, and my friend called me up, and I ran down to his store. And, it's a whole little story. My wife couldn't believe it. I brought him back to my apartment. I was living in Sherman Oaks. And my wife, I said, I'm bringing George Harrison. And she just went, at that time, the Beatles were just like Michael Jackson, Beyonce, the Pope, and the President all at once. And so she went, yeah, right. And then next thing, George walked in with his friend Mal Evans, who was the Beatles' road manager. Mm-hmm. So that's one of them. And then another one is I used to run ads in the Daily News, the Green Sheet they called it, and the LA Times for Wanted to Buy. And I got a call, and it was a guy named Robbie who wanted to come over and see what I had, because there were no stores that really had vintage guitars. And he came over and introduced himself, and it turned out that was Robbie Robertson from the band, I was a big fan, but I didn't know what Robbie looked like. And
He's
so
a heartthrob.
Yeah, and then, became an actor as well, and The Last Waltz, and Carney, and a number of things, and record producer. And so Robbie came in, and I had a 3-bedroom apartment just filled with collectible guitars. And Robbie asked if he could bring a friend over. And I said, sure. And he ended up bringing Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Robin Ford, and kind of put us on the map. So eventually we had to open a store. And I guess a lot of people felt, if Robbie and Bob and Joni buy guitars from this guy, he must be okay. Mm-hmm. So that really kind of established, what we were doing.
And speaking of The Last Waltz, one of my favorite films of all time, I actually saw it at the Cinerama Dome.
I was there. I think it's the greatest music documentary of all time.
I had to buy the album twice because I
played through it.
I played through it. And I always thought that version, that Creedence version of The Wait was the best one that they ever did. Because I think they had the Stable Singers or somebody as backup.
Yeah,
that was great. But speaking of that, your guitars have also been used in films.
Well, The Last Waltz was one of them. Actually, the first film that we loaned instruments to was called Bound for Glory. Mm-hmm. It was a Woody Guthrie story, and it was David Carradine who played Woody in the movie. And a lot of times back then, a lot of the movie producers didn't think that people were paying that much attention to the guitars. Like if you saw, if the movie was set in 1955 and a 1975 car drove through, they would get busted for that. But they figured guitars, they probably not so much. But it turns out that they started taking it more seriously, and they wanted to get things correct. So they started coming to us to get time period. So we've done movies from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, '70s, Temptation Story, Streets of Fire for the Boys with Bette Midler, on and on and on. Why Do
Back to
Fools
the
Fall in
Future.
Love? Back to the Future, which they are. I rented a guitar to that. Now they're looking for that guitar, and they're trying to do. Gibson is trying to do a documentary about finding that guitar now.
Where do you suppose it is?
Well, I originally sold it to a friend of mine that I went to school with in Miami, and he passed away, and his wife sold it, and now they're looking for it. And then about 3 years later, they did Back to the Future 2,
Right.
and they wanted to duplicate the guitar, and I didn't have the guitar anymore. So what happened was we found something very similar, and it worked for the movie, but there's one little distinguishing factor on the guitar. On the 12th fret of the guitar, the mother of pearl inlay was a solid block on the original one, and on the one that dated Back to the Future 2, the inlay was split in half. And so we found Back to the Future 2, but Back to the Future 1 they're still looking for.
I know it's very distinct. It was the red. It was
Yeah.
red, right?
And originally, they had asked me, the movie was set in 1955, and they wanted a guitar that was authentic to 1955. So I suggested this one guitar, and it's called an ES5 Switchmaster. And I said, well, this would be kind of futuristic for the time and all that. And they rented the guitar for 10 weeks, never used it. The day that they went to film it for the first time, they opened the case, and the art director walked over and said, oh no, I think we want a red guitar with a whammy bar. I said, well, there's only a couple things that you could use to be time correct, the Fender Stratocaster, or possibly a Gretsch guitar, like a Do-A-Jet or something like that. And the art director saw another guitar we had on the wall, which was this red ES345, and he said, no, that'll work. I said, well, that's not time correct. That guitar came out in about 1959 or 60. And he said, well, we'll take some artistic liberties, and that's what they did, and they ended up using that guitar.
Speaking of the artistry of the guitars, tell me a little bit about that and what goes into that. I mean, they're all so different and so much thought, and how do musicians connect to that?
Well, different guitars do different things, of course. In terms of the acoustic guitars, of course, there's the flat top center hole guitars, which are mostly folk and Americana and that kind of thing. The F-hole guitars, which are maybe the thick body guitars with F-holes, those are primarily jazz guitars, although you can use them for different things. There's nothing is set in stone. But then there's the, as music became louder and louder, some of these thick guitars would feed back at high volume. So they started doing thin body, semi, solid, and solid body guitars. And so they can all be applied differently. And, you can play one guitar and have it work for all styles of music, but they're primarily designed for certain things. And I call them functional art. Because some art, you look on the wall, point at it, look at it for 5 minutes and go, well, that's cool. But this actually makes music and makes sounds. They create different sounds and they play differently. So there's just a million different applications. And every time you think you know what that application is, somebody shows up with a guitar doing something not even what it was intended for originally, but just seems to work.
Interesting. And you've got banjos in here. You don't just have guitars.
It's fretted string instruments. We're primarily guitars, but we have mandolins,
Right.
banjos, some ukuleles, but it's primarily guitars, bass guitars, both acoustic and electric, and mostly American made.
And you have, of course, so many celebrity collectors and friends, and Kiefer Sutherland, for instance, who produced the documentary.
Right, he was the executive producer.
Right,
with my daughter and Devin Dilmore.
Oh.
So Devin was a friend that my daughter went to school with, and during the pandemic, he was out of work. And my daughter thought maybe we should do like a story just to show my kids what their granddad did. So it started out, it was just going to be almost like a home movie. And then I told my daughter to kind of leave my customers and friends alone. And she basically told me to shut up, and she was taking over. And
It isn't, well, it's a parade. If I had to list all the names of the people in that, I would run over my word count.
yeah, we've been very fortunate. And the good thing is a lot of them live in LA.
Right.
So that's been the luck out,
Yeah.
is that, we can call them, they're friends, they stop by from time to time, mostly unannounced.
Yeah.
So we never know who might be coming through, but we didn't get any resistance. Everybody was
I
glad
could tell,
to do
I
it.
could tell. And it's better, the interesting part is when Kiefer, and I think some of the other ones admit that his borderline hobby addiction, that they have so many of them. How does that happen?
Well, strangely enough, Kiefer is a very well-respected musician. He's very
I
good.
didn't really know that.
And he's more popular in Europe as a musician, and he tours there all the time. And he's been playing for a long time. He's a great songwriter. He's a very good singer, and a very good guitarist. He's been a customer for about 40 years, and just a good buddy. And so when he found out we were doing it, he became the executive producer. And and it's strange because a lot of musicians are not, if a musician wants to be an actor, a lot of times they don't take him seriously. A lot of times if an actor wants to be a musician, same kind of thing. And, so what ends up happening is they go, well, he's an actor or he's a musician. Kiefer is a double or triple threat as a songwriter, musician, and actor.
Yeah, he's
So-
definitely a great actor.
One of my favorite actors, and he is a really good musician.
Yeah.
So everything just kind of fell together.
But he's
Organically.
collected so many. I think he has to purge a little bit
Right.
now.
Yeah, it got to the point where he felt like if I buy one, I've got to sell something else. Not that he needed the money, but just as a space thing and all that. And I know a lot of musicians, professional musicians that have over 100 guitars. A lot of times the companies will give them to them as endorsements. Sometimes, they collect them just for, different purposes, and they've become a really fantastic investment over the years.
And the reason that they also respect you and why you're so knowledgeable is because you played in bands since
Yes.
high school, right?
Yep.
And all through?
Yeah, even junior high school, I
Yeah.
was playing in bands.
Yeah.
So, I was in Miami, and I played in bands, and I came out here with a band. We had a band, there was a guy named Bobby Caldwell who recently passed away a few years ago, but he had a very big hit called What You Won't Do for Love. But he also wrote a lot of tunes for a lot of other people, and he was really a fantastic musician. We came out, we were playing in Miami, and we were recording in Criteria Studios, and Little Richard and his brother heard the band and brought us out to California to play for Mo Austin, who was the president of Warner Brothers at the time.
And that was right around sort of the California sound period, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, they found us in about '69. We came
Right.
out in '70.
Okay, a little bit.
And we came out here and hoping to make it big, but I was already kind of buying and selling some guitars in Miami as a side hustle to try to I've been married for 55 years. I wanted to raise a family. I wanted to support my family, and sometimes you can't always depend on money being a musician unless you hit the big time. So it was just something that I was already doing, but being out here, there was a lot more opportunity.
Now, they touch on this in the documentary. But what if, should you decide to retire, what is going to happen to the shop then?
Well, that still remains to be seen. We actually have There's a couple people that have been inquiring about it. We really don't know. I mean, it's not the first love of my kids. My daughter has a very good business where she has about 30 or 40 writers that write for her. And my son likes it, but he's into other things. He sings, and he's pretty artistic. He does a lot of our T-shirts. We have about 30 designs of T-shirts, and I think if there is a Guinness Book of Records of one store selling more shirts than any other store, I would think we would probably have to be possibly even number one. I don't know.
Oh, we'll see. Well, you look good. How you feel?
Well, I feel like an old man, but I love what I do. I'm around a lot of young people, and that keeps me focused and gives me a purpose. And I think I love what I do. So when I get up and I go to work, we're only open now. During the pandemic, we only open for 3 days a week, and we've kept it that way: Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday from 11:30 to 6. And so the hours are pretty easy. And now people know when we're open, so they come in and so it's pretty condensed. So sometimes it's pretty wild in here when we're open.
And everybody everybody's name. I mean, if this was a bar, it would be called Cheers, right?
Kind of, I mean, it's, hopefully we have created a friendly atmosphere. And, the people that come in, we all speak the same language, and that's the language of guitars and music. And we all have something in common. And no matter where people are on the political spectrum with all the terrible stuff going on in the world right now, it's something you can sit down at a concert. You can be sitting next to somebody who feels completely different than you do politically, but can agree on they love what's being played and the music up there.
And there will always be music.
Right. And one thing I've always said is that music is like magic. It can take you back someplace where you want to be, where your first boyfriend, your parents, whatever, if your folks are gone or whatever, it can take you right back to where you once were. And that's one of the only things I think that can do that.
That's really true. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to take a few photos.
Sure.